The pull into darkness, Ethan Cole walked alone through the dim corridor of the abandoned alien station. The place was silent, except for the low hum of distant machinery. His footsteps echoed softly on the metal floor as pale blue lights flickered. Overhead, he had been hired to check the power systems. Nothing more, just a quick job, in and out. But something about the way the shadows moved along the walls made him uneasy. He adjusted the strap of his tool bag and glanced around. The station was old, long forgotten. With walls covered in scratches and strange alien markings, dust floated in the air like faint mist, making every step feel heavy. His earpiece crackled. But no one spoke on the other end. The maintenance team he came with was far away on the other side of the station. Ethan didn't like being separated, but this route was faster, or so he thought. Then, without warning, a hand shot out from the shadows and grabbed his wrist. The grip was strong, but not painful. Before he could react, the figure yanked him into a narrow, dark alcove between two support beams. He opened his mouth to speak, but a finger pressed against his lips. A pair of wide, glowing violet eyes stared into his. A whisper, soft and urgent, brushed against his ear. "Don't make a sound." Ethan froze. The voice was feminine, trembling, but filled with a strange strength. He could feel her breath, quick and shallow, as if she had been running for her life. Footsteps echoed nearby, not human footsteps. These were heavier, uneven, accompanied by faint clicking sounds. Whatever it was coming closer. The girl's grip on his wrist tightened. Her other hand held onto the edge of the wall as if she could melt into the darkness itself. Ethan's mind raced. Who was she, and why? Was she hiding here? More importantly, who or what was she hiding from? He tried to whisper a question, but she shook her head sharply. Her long, silver hair shimmered faintly under the flickering lights. She was clearly not human. Her ears were slightly pointed. Her skin pale with a faint blue tint. Her clothes were torn and dusty, like she had been running for days. A faint scar ran across her cheek, fresh enough to still look painful. The sound of the footsteps grew louder. Ethan turned his head slowly toward the corridor. That's when he saw it. A massive shadow sliding across the wall. The silhouette was tall, with elongated arms and something like claws at the end. The clicking sound was now louder, like the tapping of sharp nails on metal. Every instinct in his body told him to move, but the girl's grip kept him still. The shadow passed, but then it stopped. The creature sniffed the air, making a low, rumbling noise that made Ethan's skin crawl. The girl pressed closer to him, her lips almost touching his ear. "If you move, if you speak, we're dead," she breathed. He stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe for a long moment. The only sound was the slow, deep breathing of the creature just beyond the wall. Finally, after what felt like forever, the shadow moved away. The footsteps faded, swallowed by the distance. The girl didn't move immediately. She stayed still, listening. Only when the corridor was completely silent did she release his wrist. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "What the hell is going on?" he whispered. She glanced around, her eyes scanning every corner before she met his gaze. "They're hunting me," she said simply. Her voice was soft, but there was a weight in it that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Who's hunting you?" he asked, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The collectors?" she whispered. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the way she said it made him feel cold. "They don't leave witnesses," she added. Before he could ask more, she grabbed his hand again. "We can't stay here. They'll sweep this section next." She moved quickly, her steps silent and precise. Ethan followed, unsure why he was letting a stranger drag him deeper into danger. Maybe it was her fear. Maybe it was the way she seemed to know exactly where to step. They slipped into a side corridor, lit only by a faint green emergency light. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust. As they moved, Ethan noticed the walls were dented and clawed. Some marks were deep enough to cut through the metal entirely. They reached a maintenance hatch. She crouched and started to open it, her fingers moving quickly over the old locking mechanism. Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly. Names? Ethan, he whispered, hoping to break the tension. She hesitated only for a second before whispering back. Lyra. The hatch opened with a faint creak. A rush of colder air spilled out, carrying with it the smell of dust and metal. Lyra slipped inside first, motioning for him to follow. Inside was a narrow crawl space that seemed to run beneath the main corridors. The sound of the station above was muffled here. Ethan crawled behind her, the dim light from her small wrist device guiding the way as they moved deeper. He realized something. She hadn't once looked back at the way they came. Whatever was hunting her, she had no intention of going back. He didn't know where this crawl space led. He didn't know why he was following her. But as the sound of those clicking footsteps echoed faintly through the metal walls, he knew one thing. If he let go of her now, he might never make it out alive. Whispers in the dark. The crawl space was narrow and cold, the air heavy with dust and the faint scent of old machinery. Ethan moved behind Lyra, his knees aching from crawling, his palms scraping against rough metal, the dim glow from her wrist. Device cast just enough light to reveal the path ahead, but also enough to show the cobweb-like strands of alien wiring hanging from the ceiling. Each time he brushed against them, they made a faint, whispery sound. And Ethan flinched, worried it might draw attention. Lyra moved quickly, but carefully, her head always slightly tilted, as if she were listening for something only she could hear. She paused suddenly, holding up a hand to signal him to stop. Ethan froze, his breath held in his throat. A deep thud echoed somewhere above them, followed by the metallic scrape of claws. The sound moved along the ceiling, slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Lyra pressed her finger to her lips again, her violet eyes locked on his. They waited in silence, not even daring to breathe. After a few tense moments, the sound faded away. Lyra gestured for him to keep moving. Ethan whispered, unable to hold back his curiosity. What are they? Those things? She didn't answer right away, her hands still moving forward. Finally, she whispered back, her voice almost too low to hear. They're called collectors. Hunters that track anything valuable. Her words felt cold, like they carried years of fear and pain. They're not just after me, she continued. They take people, artifacts, technology, anything they think is worth keeping. Ethan frowned in the dark. But why you? What do they want from you? Her pace slowed, and she glanced over her shoulder. My blood, she said, her tone flat. Ethan almost stopped crawling. What? Lyra's eyes didn't waver. They need it for something. Something that will make them stronger. She looked forward again, quickening her pace. I escaped once, but they don't let go of their prey. Not ever. Ethan's mind was spinning. He had heard stories about alien slavers, pirates, and warlords, but nothing like this. Something about the way Lyra spoke told him she had seen the worst of them firsthand. And yet, she was here, pulling him into her nightmare. Part of him wanted to turn back, find his crew, and leave. But the other part, the part that had looked into her desperate eyes, couldn't just abandon her. They reached a small chamber in the crawl space, a wider area where they could stand up. Ethan stretched his legs and took a deep breath. Lyra was already scanning the walls, her hands brushing over panels and seams. We're in an old maintenance hub, she said softly. If I can find the right route, we can get to the lower docking ring without crossing the main halls. That sounds good, Ethan whispered. But what's down there? A chance, she replied simply. Nothing more, nothing less. Before Ethan could ask more, A faint voice echoed through the metal walls. It wasn't speaking words. It was a low, chittering sound, almost like an insect calling to another. Lyra's posture stiffened. "They're talking to each other," she murmured. "They know we're in this section." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. "How far?" "Too close," she said, already moving toward another narrow tunnel at the far end of the chamber. They slipped inside, the sound of the chittering growing sharper, clearer. It was coming from multiple directions now. Ethan could feel the vibration. Through the floor panels, the hunters were moving fast. He tried to keep his breathing steady, but every muscle in his body was tense. Why not just run for it? He whispered. Lyra shook her head without looking back. They can hear every step, smell every breath. You can't outrun them. The tunnel curved sharply and dropped into a steep decline. They slid down carefully, the metal cold under their hands. At the bottom was a grate, and beyond it, a dimly lit corridor. Lyra crouched and listened for several seconds before speaking. "This is part of the station's forgotten lower decks. The collectors don't patrol here often. But it's not safe either." She began loosening the bolts on the grate with quiet precision. Ethan kept watch, his ears straining for any sign of the clicking footsteps. When the grate finally came free, Lyra slipped through first, scanning both directions of the corridor before motioning him forward. The floor here was littered with debris, broken panels, loose wires, and shattered pieces of alien equipment. Faint lights flickered overhead, casting quick shadows that made Ethan's nerves spike every few seconds. They moved quickly, but not without caution. Every noise they made sounded louder than it should, echoing into the emptiness as they turned a corner. Ethan caught sight of something that made him stop cold. On the wall, smeared in what looked like dried black blood, was a single word scratched in jagged alien script. "What does that say?" he asked quietly. Lyra's eyes darkened. "It says property of the collectors," she replied. Her voice shook just enough for Ethan to notice. They kept moving until they reached a sealed maintenance hatch. Lyra pressed her ear against it. Listening from the other side came a faint hum, the sound of active machinery. "This could be our way through," she said. "But it's risky." "How risky?" Ethan asked. "Enough that if we make a mistake, they'll hear us from 3 decks away," she answered. Ethan studied her face for a moment. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were still sharp. He realized then that she wasn't just trying to survive, she was planning something. Before he could ask, the chittering voices came again. This time, much closer. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound. "They've split up. They're trying to corner us," she whispered. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. So what now? Lyra stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "Now, we make them think we vanished." The sealed door of the tunnel narrowed until it felt like they were crawling inside the throat of some ancient metal beast. The air grew colder, and each breath Ethan took came out in a faint mist. The sound of the chittering was still behind them, echoing like whispers in the dark. But now there was something else too. A slow, deep thud that rattled the walls with each step. Lyra stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. Her breathing steady despite the fear Ethan knew she was feeling. In front of them stood a heavy security door, its surface covered in strange, glowing alien symbols. It looked different from the rest of the station, newer, stronger, untouched by the rust and decay around it. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "Beyond this door, there's a direct crawl passage to the lower docking ring." Ethan moved closer, studying the thick lock panel on the side. "This isn't like the other doors. It's sealed hard," he muttered, running his hand over the smooth surface. Lyra's voice was urgent now. "Can you open it?" Ethan's fingers traced the panel. "I can try. But it's alien tech. And if I mess this up, it might make a noise loud enough to bring every collector in this sector straight to us." She didn't blink, didn't hesitate. "Then don't mess it up." He took a deep breath and pulled a small multi-tool from his bag. As he knelt by the panel, Lyra crouched nearby, keeping watch on the tunnel they had come from every few seconds. She tilted her head like she was hearing something Ethan couldn't. The glow from her wrist device painted her pale face in shades of silver and blue, despite the danger. Ethan noticed the faint shimmer in her violet eyes, the look of someone who had learned to survive by never letting fear slow them down. The lock panel hummed faintly under his touch. Ethan popped open a small access plate, revealing thin wires pulsing with dim light. "All right, let's see what you're hiding," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He began reconnecting wires and patterns that made sense from an engineering perspective. The alien symbols above the door shifted slightly, like they were reacting to his work, but just as he was making progress. The chittering sound grew sharper, louder. Lyra stiffened, her eyes flashing toward the tunnel. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice tense. Ethan's hands didn't stop moving, but sweat began to run down the side of his face. "How close?" he asked. Her answer came in a single word. "Close enough." A deep thud echoed again. This time, right above them, dust trickled down from the ceiling, landing on Ethan's hands. He worked faster, twisting wires together, holding his breath. As the symbols on the door began to glow brighter, then a faint metallic click, the door shifted, unlocking just enough for him to push. "Got it," he whispered. Shoving the panel aside, the door slid open silently, revealing a dark chamber beyond. Lyra grabbed his wrist and pulled him inside without a word. The air inside was still, heavy with the smell of old oil and dust. The room was small, lined with shelves of ancient alien tools and parts. A faint light flickered above, casting slow-moving shadows that made the space feel alive. Ethan closed the door behind them and locked it again. But Lyra didn't relax. She walked deeper into the room, scanning the corners like she expected something to be hiding there. "This place hasn't been touched in years," she murmured, "but it's not abandoned." "Not completely," Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the far wall where deep claw marks scored the metal. Some were so deep they had cut clean through. "These weren't made by tools," she said softly. "They were made by something strong enough to break steel with its hands." The thought sent a chill through Ethan. He moved toward a control panel at the back of the room, brushing away the dust. "This must be the auxiliary controls for the crawl passage," he said. As he examined it, he noticed something strange. The panel wasn't just locked, it was deliberately fused shut. Someone didn't just close this. They sealed it from the inside. Lyra's eyes narrowed. That means someone was hiding here, and didn't want anyone following them before Ethan could reply. The faint sound of tapping began again, not from the tunnel they had come through, but from the other side of the wall. It was slow, deliberate, and heavy. Lyra's hand went to the small dagger at her side. "That's not the collectors," she whispered. "That's something else." The tapping stopped for a moment. The room was completely silent except for the hum of the light. Then, in the stillness, came a deep, low growl that vibrated through the floor. Ethan and Lyra locked eyes. Whatever was beyond that wall wasn't friendly. Ethan quickly turned back to the panel. "If we can get this open, we can bypass whatever that is." Lyra stepped closer to cover him, her back to his, as she watched the shadows shift on the far wall. He worked quickly, forcing open the fused section with his multi-tool. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by a sound like metal bending. Something was pushing against the wall. Finally, with a snap, the panel gave way. The small hatch in the corner unlocked, revealing the narrow crawl passage beyond. "Go," Ethan whispered urgently. Lyra slipped inside first, and Ethan followed, pulling the hatch closed behind them just as a massive dent appeared in the wall of the room they had left. The crawl Passage was even tighter than before. The air thick and warm. They moved fast. Their elbows scraping the sides. Behind them, the sound of tearing metal echoed, followed by a furious roar that seemed to shake the whole passage, whatever they had just escaped from was now loose, and it was angry. The truth about Laratha Crawl Passage felt endless. Ethan's arms and knees ached from crawling, and the air was so still it felt like they were breathing the same breath over and over. Somewhere behind them, the sound of tearing metal still echoed faintly. Like a nightmare refusing to fade every few seconds, Ethan glanced back. Expecting to see claws reaching for his boots, Lyra kept moving ahead, her slim frame slipping through the narrow space with ease. She didn't speak for a long time, not until the tunnel finally widened into a round maintenance shaft where they could sit. Ethan leaned against the wall, rubbing his sore shoulders. He could see the tension in her posture, her back straight, her eyes darting to every shadow, even though they were alone. "You gonna tell me what's going on now?" Ethan asked quietly. Lyra's violet eyes flicked toward him, then away. "What do you think is going on?" She replied, her tone cautious. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "you're in way deeper trouble than you're telling me. And now, so am I." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the small pouch strapped to her side and pulled out a small crystal vial. Inside was a shimmering liquid that seemed to glow faintly, pulsing like it was alive. "This is why they're hunting me," she said softly, holding the vial up to the dim light. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" "My blood," she said, her voice steady. Ethan blinked. "That's your blood?" Lyra nodded. "Not all of it, of course, but enough to make me a target for the rest of my life." Ethan leaned forward. "You better start explaining, because none of this makes sense." She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the vial. "I'm not just another alien," she began. "I'm the last of the Varen line. My people were rulers once, not because of armies, but because of what flows in our veins." Ethan stayed silent, letting her continue. "Our blood contains a compound, a living energy that can heal almost any wound, strengthen the body, even extend life," she said. "That sounds like a miracle." Ethan muttered, "It's a curse," she replied sharply, "because it makes us valuable. Too valuable. The collectors wanted to create soldiers who can't be killed, and they'll take every drop from me if they can." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He thought about the hunters stalking them through the station, about the shadows, the claws, the chittering sounds. "They'd drain you?" he asked. Lyra met his eyes without flinching. "Yes. And they won't stop until they have me." For a moment, the shaft was silent except for the faint hum of the old machinery around them. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a fugitive, but someone who had been running. Her entire life, her clothes were torn, her hands scraped, her face marked by both fresh and old scars, but her eyes, they still had that fire, that refusal to give up. "You could have left me back there," Ethan said. "Why didn't you?" Lyra hesitated, then looked away. "Because I've been running alone for too long," she admitted quietly. "And maybe I thought you wouldn't just hand me over if things got bad." Ethan gave a small, humorless smile. "Well, I guess you were right about that. But inside?" He knew this meant he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Helping her meant making enemies with one of the most dangerous groups in the galaxy. Lyra tucked the vial back into her pouch and stood. "We need to keep moving. The docking ring isn't far, but they'll be waiting." Ethan pushed himself up, wincing at the ache in his knees. "Waiting? I thought you said this was the quiet route." "It is," she replied. "But quiet doesn't mean safe." They began crawling again through the next section of tunnel. This one sloped downward, the metal walls damp with condensation. Every drop of water that hit the floor sounded too loud in the silence. After several minutes, they reached a grated panel overlooking a wide maintenance bay. Through the slats, Ethan could see rows of old machinery, crates, and half-broken loading bots. But there was something else to movement. A lone collector stood in the shadows, its body tall and insect-like, its limbs long and jointed in unnatural ways, its head tilted side to side as if it were listening to the air. Ethan froze, holding his breath. The thing's mandibles clicked softly as it scanned the room, even from here. He could feel its presence like a cold weight pressing against his chest. Lyra leaned close to his ear, whispering so softly he almost didn't hear her. "That's a scout. If it senses us, it will call the others." Ethan's eyes moved from the creature to the far side of the bay where another door stood. "The only way forward? How do we get past it?" He whispered back. Lyra's gaze hardened. "We don't, not yet. We wait for it to move." They stayed still for what felt like an eternity. The scout moved slowly, its clawed hands dragging lightly along the walls, leaving shallow grooves. In the metal, finally, it turned and disappeared into a side passage. Lyra exhaled slowly. "Now," she said, pushing the grate open with care. They dropped silently into the bay. Ethan's boots barely made a sound on the dusty floor. Lyra moved like a shadow, her steps light and precise. They slipped between the crates, heading for the far door. But before they reached it, a sharp, clicking sound echoed from behind them. Ethan turned, the scout was back, and this time, it wasn't alone. The silent chase, the clicking grew louder, sharp, and fast. Ethan's pulse spiked as he realized there were now two scouts, their tall, insect-like bodies moving in perfect unison. Their thin legs clattered against the metal floor. Their clawed hands scraping the walls, the sound echoed through the bay like 100 tiny knives tapping all at once. Lyra's hand gripped Ethan's arm, pulling him into the narrow shadow between two tall crates. Her breath was shallow, almost silent. She raised a finger to her lips, her violet eyes locking on his with a silent warning. "Don't make a sound." The scouts moved closer, their heads tilting side to side. Mandibles clicked rapidly, as if they were speaking to each other. Ethan felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud and heavy in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but Lyra's grip kept him still. One of the scouts stopped just a few steps away. Its head turned slowly toward their hiding spot. Ethan held his breath until his chest began to ache. The scout's claw tapped the side of the crate, a slow, deliberate sound. It sniffed the air, or whatever counted as sniffing for a creature like this, then moved on. But the other one was still circling, its steps slow and deliberate. Lyra leaned close too, Ethan's ear, whispering so faintly it was almost just a breath. "When I move, follow me exactly. Step where I step." He nodded, barely daring to make the motion. Then, without a sound, she shifted her weight and slipped out from behind the crate. Her movements were smooth, almost unnatural. Each step placed so lightly it didn't even creak the floor. Ethan followed, mimicking her every move. They weaved between crates and broken machinery. Keeping low, the scouts continued their slow patrol, their clicking filling the air like an unending metronome of danger. Each time one came too close, Lyra froze, and Ethan froze with her. They waited, sometimes for long, breathless seconds, before moving again. They were halfway to the far door when disaster struck. Ethan's boot brushed against a loose piece of metal. It slid an inch, making the faintest scrape. It was a sound, barely louder than a whisper, but to the scouts, it was like an alarm. Both creatures stopped instantly, their heads snapping toward the sound. Then, in perfect sync, they screeched a high-pitched, piercing cry that made Ethan's ears ring. The sound was followed by the rapid clatter of claws as they charged. "Run," Lyra hissed. They sprinted toward the far door, weaving between obstacles. The scouts were fast, too fast, their long limbs covering ground in huge strides. Ethan could hear their claws scraping along the metal floor just behind him. Lyra reached the door first, slamming her hand onto the control panel. Nothing happened. "It's locked," she gasped. Ethan shoved his multi-tool into the panel. Wire sparking as he forced the mechanism, the scout's screeches grew louder. Echoing off the walls, one leaped onto a nearby crate, its claws digging deep into the metal as it prepared to pounce. "Hurry," Lyra urged, her voice tight. "I'm trying." Ethan shot back, with a sharp crack. The door panel came loose. Ethan yanked a pair of wires free and jammed them together. The door slid open halfway before stuttering to a stop. Lyra ducked through the gap, Ethan right behind her. The scouts lunged, their claws swiping the air just inches from Ethan's back as he slammed the door shut. They stumbled into a dark corridor, the only light coming from faint strips along the floor. The sound of the scouts' claws raked against the other side of the door. A metallic screech that made Ethan's teeth ache. "They'll get through," he panted. "Then we keep moving," Lyra said, already pulling him down the corridor. This section of the station was narrow, the walls closing in like a tunnel. Their footsteps echoed. So Lyra slowed to a silent creep again. But the danger hadn't passed. The chittering was back. Now ahead of them, Ethan's stomach dropped. "They're in front of us too," he whispered. Lyra's jaw tightened, which means they know exactly where we are. The corridor ended at a small hatch on the floor. Lyra dropped to her knees and began working the latch. The clicking was louder now, coming from both ends of the corridor. Shadows moved along the walls. More than two this time. Ethan crouched low, watching both directions. "They're closing in," he said. "I know," Lyra replied, forcing the hatch open. A rush of cold air came from below without hesitating. She slipped down into the darkness. Ethan followed, dropping into a cramped, vertical shaft. They slid down the metal ladder as fast as they could, the sound of claws above growing more frantic when they reached the bottom. They found themselves in a dim storage bay filled with massive fuel drums. Lyra moved quickly, weaving between the drums. "Stay close," she whispered. Ethan followed, keeping his head low. The sound of the hatch above opening made his heart skip. The scouts had found the shaft, and now they were coming down. Lyra's eyes scanned the shadows until she spotted another exit, a maintenance door tucked behind a row of containers. She signaled Ethan to head for it. They reached it just as the first scout's claws scraped the floor behind them. Lyra slammed her hand onto the control, and this time the door slid open instantly. They darted through and sealed it behind them, the sound of frustrated screeches echoing on the other side. For a moment, they stood in the quiet, breathing hard. Ethan leaned against the wall. That was too close, he said. Lyra nodded, her voice low, "And it's only going to get worse." The last door of the corridor beyond the storage bay was silent. Too silent, Ethan could hear his own breathing echo off the narrow walls. And every step felt heavier than the last. Lyra moved ahead, her dagger in hand, her eyes darting to every shadow. The air here was colder, and the dim lights flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. After several turns, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. And there it was, the last door, a massive, reinforced blast door with alien markings carved deep into its surface. Beyond it lay the docking bay, their one chance to reach Ethan's small ship and escape this nightmare. But there was a problem. The door wasn't unguarded. Two collectors stood before it. These weren't scouts. They were taller, broader, their bodies covered in thick, chitinous armor that gleamed under the faint light. They carried long, curved weapons that looked like a cross between a spear and a hook. Their heads moved slowly, scanning the room every few seconds. Their mandibles clicked in a low rhythm, like a predator's heartbeat. Ethan and Lyra crouched behind a large Metal crate at the edge of the chamber, he leaned close to whisper. So, what's the plan? Lyra's gaze stayed locked on the guards, their sentinels. She murmured, faster, stronger, and smarter than the scouts. If we fight them head-on, we die. Ethan frowned. Then what do? There's no other way out. She didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning the walls. The floor, the ceiling. Finally, she pointed upward. A cluster of old pipes ran across the ceiling, weaving above the sentinels and toward the far wall. If we can get above them, we might slip past without them knowing, she said. Ethan looked up, then back at her. That's a big might. It's better than dying, she replied simply. They moved quietly to the side wall where a rusted maintenance ladder climbed. Toward the pipes, the metal groaned under their weight as they began to climb. Every sound felt like it echoed too far, halfway up. One of the sentinels stopped and tilted its head. Ethan froze, his hands gripping the ladder tight. The sentinel's eyes scanned the room slowly, its mandibles clicking once, twice, then it turned back to its patrol. They reached the pipes and began crawling across them. The metal was slick with condensation, and every movement had to be slow and careful. Below, the sentinels paced, their weapons glinting as they moved. Ethan's heart pounded so loudly he was sure they would hear it. One wrong move, one drop of water falling from above, and they would be dead. They were almost halfway across when disaster struck. A small piece of rusted metal broke under Ethan's hand and fell. It clanged against the floor below. Both sentinels stopped instantly, their heads snapping upward, their mandibles clicked rapidly. An alarm. Move, Lyra hissed. They scrambled forward as the sentinels leaped, their hooks slashing upward. One strike missed Ethan's foot by inches. Slicing through the pipe instead, a burst of steam filled the air, obscuring everything. Lyra dropped down first, landing in a crouch near the far wall. Ethan followed, hitting the ground hard, his knees jolting with pain. The sentinels charged through the steam, their silhouettes looming larger with each step. Lyra grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward the door's side panel. Cover me, she said. Already pulling tools from her pouch, Ethan turned, holding a long metal rod he had grabbed from the floor. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The first sentinel swung its hook, and Ethan barely blocked it. The force sent him stumbling back. The second sentinel came from the side, but Lyra ducked under its strike and jammed her dagger into one of its joints. The creature shrieked, its body twisting violently. Ethan swung the rod into the first sentinel's head, but it barely staggered. These things don't go down easy. He gasped. Just hold them off, Lyra called, her hands flying over the panel's alien controls. The door's markings began to glow faintly. The first sentinel lunged again, but Ethan sidestepped and slammed the rod into its arm. The second sentinel tried to grab Lyra, but she rolled away, never stopping her work. Then, a deep, heavy clunk. The door's locks began to disengage. Got it, Lyra shouted. They sprinted toward the gap as the door began to slide open. But the sentinels weren't done. One hurled its weapon like a spear, the sharp hook embedding itself into the wall. Just inches from Ethan's head, they slipped through the opening, Lyra slamming the emergency seal behind them. The door closed just as the sentinels slammed into it, their claws screeching against the metal. Ethan and Lyra stood in the docking bay at last. Rows of ships, most long abandoned, filled the vast space in the far corner. Ethan saw his small vessel, old but still spaceworthy. This is it, he said, breathing hard. Lyra's eyes stayed on the sealed door. They won't stop, she murmured. Not until we're gone, or dead. Escape or capture the docking bay smelled of old fuel and dust. Dim overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows across rows of silent ships. Ethan's vessel, a battered but reliable cargo hauler, sat at the far end, its landing ramp already Down. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her forward, his boots pounding against the metal floor behind them. The sealed blast door shuddered under the force of the Sentinel's blows. Each impact echoed through the bay like a drumbeat of doom. "They're breaking through," Lyra said, her voice tight. "Then we don't have time," Ethan replied. They sprinted past derelict shuttles and empty crates, weaving between piles of abandoned cargo. The sound of the door's final lock breaking made Ethan's stomach twist. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The shriek of the Sentinels told him everything. They reached the ramp, and Ethan shoved Lyra up first. She disappeared inside the ship while he slammed his hand against the control to retract the ramp. But the Sentinels were already crossing the bay, their hooked weapons dragging sparks across the floor. The ramp was only halfway up when one of them leaped, slamming onto it with enough force to make the ship rock. Ethan stumbled back as the Sentinel crawled toward him, its claws digging into the metal. Lyra appeared with a plasma pistol she had found in the ship's emergency kit. She fired the bolt, hitting the Sentinel's chest. It shrieked, but didn't fall, its armor smoking but holding. "Inside, now," Ethan shouted. They ran for the cockpit. Ethan dropped into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship's systems roared to life, the engines whining as they powered up. Lyra stood behind him, pistol raised, watching the corridor that led back to the ramp. The Sentinel appeared again, forcing its way inside. It swung its hook at her, but she ducked, firing another shot. The ship's hull vibrated as the second Sentinel slammed against it from the outside. Ethan cursed under his breath, pushing the thrusters to maximum. The hauler lifted slowly off the docking platform. The Sentinel inside lunged at him, but Lyra threw herself into its path, stabbing her dagger into a gap in its armor. The creature roared, twisting violently, but she didn't let go. Ethan turned the ship toward the bay doors, his focus locked on the controls. "Lyra, we're out of time," he shouted. She yanked the dagger free and dove to the side as Ethan hit the emergency decompression switch. The side hatch blew open with a violent rush of air. The Sentinel, caught off balance, was pulled toward the opening. It clawed at the floor, screeching, but the pull was too strong. With one final furious shriek, it was ripped into the void of space. Lyra slammed the hatch shut, panting hard. "Remind me never to stand near that button," she said. Ethan didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on the bay doors ahead. They were opening far too slowly. Behind them, the second Sentinel had leaped onto the ship's hull, its claws scraping across the canopy above the cockpit. The sound was like nails on glass, sharp and relentless. Ethan angled the ship upward, hoping to throw it off. Lyra grabbed the co-pilot's seat, her hands flying over the weapons panel. She found the forward turret controls and aimed. When the Sentinel's shadow moved across the glass again, she fired. The blast rocked the ship. The Sentinel was flung from the hull, tumbling into the far wall of the docking bay. By the time it recovered, Ethan had pushed the hauler through the gap in the doors. They burst into the open black of space, stars stretching endlessly ahead. But the danger wasn't over. On the radar, multiple blips appeared, collector interceptors launching from hidden bays around the station. "They're coming," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're faster than us, but we've got one advantage." "What's that?" she asked. "They don't know how desperate I am right now." He pushed the engines to their limit, the ship shuddering as it accelerated. The interceptors closed in fast, their weapons charging. Lyra locked the rear turret and began firing. In short, precise bursts, her aim was deadly. One interceptor exploded into fragments, scattering across the void. But the others kept coming. A blast rocked the ship, alarms blaring. Ethan fought to keep the hauler steady, his hands gripping the controls like his life depended on it, because it did. "Shields are down to 40%, Lyra called. Then we make 40%. Count, Ethan replied. He steered the ship toward a nearby asteroid field. The interceptors followed, but their larger size made it harder for them to maneuver. Ethan wove between massive spinning rocks, the hull scraping dangerously close to their jagged edges. 2 more interceptors crashed into the asteroids, shattering on impact. The last one kept coming. But Lyra was ready. She fired a final shot, the blast hitting its engine directly. It spun out of control and vanished into the rocks. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Ethan let out a slow breath. They had escaped, for now. Lyra slumped into the co-pilot's seat, still holding the pistol loosely in her hand. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. "Looks like we saved each other." She looked out at the endless stars ahead. "They'll keep coming," she said. "They never stop." Ethan nodded. "Then neither will." The hauler's engines roared as it disappeared into the darkness. 2 fugitives, bound by survival, racing toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in a long time, Lyra wasn't running alone.